Hey y'all, I'm Ash Vampire. Welcome. This is going to be a bit of a different kind of video. We're not going to be talking about anime directly per se, but we are going to be talking about something, and I'm going to jump right into it. I'm really excited to be doing this entire project. I've been working on this for a past couple weeks, and the first thing I want to discuss real quick before we jump right into the real content here is scoring. The kind of universal system for otaku is MAL. Everybody uses MAL. That's where people categorize. That is where they catalog. That's where they score their shows. And over the course of my time as an otaku and, talking to other people about scoring shows and like what they think of shows, there's an almost universal disgust almost of the inefficiency associated with MAL's scoring system. It's 1 through 10. There's no real variability within that. And the little blurb words that they have next to each score, they don't really tell you anything. And a lot of the problems that come out of MAL have resulted from the fact that you can have two shows that you score the exact same thing, but for completely different reasons. So it becomes almost completely ineffectual as a way to sort of gauge what someone's opinions of a show are. It's not efficient. It's not effective. To counter this, a lot of people have tried to come up with scoring rubrics in the past. They've tried to, come up with ways to, better analyze stuff. And I am here because I finally got to a point where I also needed to do this. I couldn't stand it anymore, and I wanted to do something that was more efficient, more exploratory of the show in general, and also was something that, more than one person could actually use, and was a way to be able to use the score itself as a way to have a discussion. One of the big things that I ran into while trying to create a rubric is, how do you account for biases? How do you allow for subjectivity to still influence the score? Because it's not, you can't get around that, and still be able to produce a result that you are happy with. Well, I came up with something, and I'm going to show it on screen right now. This is the Ash Vampire scoring rubric. Here we go. This is what we've got. Now, throughout the course of this video, we're going to go through 3 different stages, okay? What we're going to do is I'm going to explain how this entire system works, and then I'm going to show you a show that I have completed and already rescored using this rubric. And then we're going to go into a show that I have completed but haven't used this rubric for. And we're going to go and we're going to look at it, and I'm going to go through exactly the thought process involved in actually doing one of these in real time. So, this is designed to be a rubric that does a lot of the work for you and actually allows you to account for your own biases, your forgetfulness maybe, or maybe even your inability to know whether or not something is something you can actually judge. There are certain things in the creation of a show that some people are going to be more knowledgeable about than others, and there's also going to be parts where your ignorance or your lack of your lack of involvement is going to make you just not care about that thing. So this is designed to be able to account for all of those things and produce a result that is consistent and produce a result that you can then take and use across your entire completed list and be able to really, have something that moves the discussion of what you liked or didn't like about a show. It focuses it down. It prevents it from being confusing. The first thing I want to say about this chart here is I am not a fan of holistic scores. I don't like the idea of the one big score talking about the whole show. This rubric is designed to have one of those for cataloging purposes almost exclusively. I don't think that a holistic score tells you anything about what the person really thought about the show, and I don't think that it really has any benefit to analysis or discussion. It's designed for cataloging. It's designed for you to be able to put all of your shows in a numerical order and be able to be like, yes, this was better than this overall. So this has that, but I want to stress that this chart is designed to de-emphasize it as much as possible, that the real meat of this is going to come in how everything else on this actually gets applied. So this is a branching tree rubric, as is probably evident, and the way that this works is that you can go top to bottom, bottom to top, doesn't really matter, but it's an averaging system. So you place a score at the end branches, and then you average all of those scores up to generate a value for the source branch, and you move all the way up, going to finally getting your holistic end score. Now, this is based on a -10 to a +10 scale. We're trying to get a wide variety of nuance here, giving you the ability to really dive deep and really get that specificity with whether or not something is good or bad. So I would also encourage the use of at least a single decimal point for even more specificity. It's obviously not required, but in this video, we're going to actually be using at least a single decimal point. Now, the important thing to note here with this thing is the zero value. What does zero mean? Because it's very important, and this was probably the most difficult part for me to figure out how to balance this sheet, because zero does a lot of things on this rubric. First off, zero is for average. The most average thing that you could think of if one of these things is just pure average, it simply exists and it functions. It's neither good nor bad. You would place a 0. But 0 also functions as a thing to, specify I didn't care about that thing, or I don't remember that thing. I'm ambivalent, or I don't know enough about that particular aspect of a show, right? So if we want to go in and, for me, music is this way for me a lot of the time. I'm not somebody who knows a lot about music. So if we go down to the music branch, right down around here, so mixing, variance, the OP and the ED, tone and integration. Some of these, if I'm not, if it didn't stand out to me, I would place a 0 here because I don't have the knowledge necessary to accurately score this thing. I would also put a 0 there. 0 also is designed to help balance this sheet against all of those things. So we'll keep with music. This has 5 branches underneath it. If I put 2 zeros here, but I rate 3 others, we are not going to create our music score using an average of 5. We are going to create our music score using an average of 3. Anytime a 0 shows up, it is not counted in the number of things that you divide by to generate your score. This helps balance it, and this helps take away this prevents you from lowering your score simply because you didn't care or it was average, or you don't have enough to say about it to put an actual value. It's a balancing effect. That's the most important part about this entire thing, is that 0 does not count toward the sum total division. So before we get into an actual show, I'm going to explain everything on here and why they're placed where they are. So a show, in my mind, is constructed of 2 key parts: the mechanical aspect and the meta aspect. Okay? Mechanical is going to be everything to do with the physical construction of the show. We see it broken down here as we go down to the branch: your art, your animation, your music, and your writing. These are things that you can see, you can analyze, that you can observe within the show. And then you have meta. This is going to be the source material. This is going to be the time in which you personally watched it, okay? Because that is going to influence how you view something. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. History is about what was the show's historical importance. Was it something that came out at a time where it sort of defined a genre or pushed design into a particular place, influenced things in a way? Is it a historic show? Is it important in the books? Then there's obviously the studio. Do you have a particular attachment to a studio? Or is there a studio you just cannot stand and you hate everything that they do? That's designed to account for here. And then staff, obviously, certain staff members, directors, voice actresses, producers. A lot of these guys, they aren't stuck with a particular studio. A lot of time they are, but sometimes they're not. And let's say that we'll take a voice actress, for example. You are a real fan of a voice actress's performances, and you like almost every show that she's in because she's in there, and you'll watch things that you otherwise normally wouldn't because of a particular person involved with the project. That's what this is designed to account for. Now, the reason that meta is balanced against the mechanical is because this here, meta, I have seen meta influence more people's scores than anything. This is a bias balance, right? This is designed to account for the fact that people are harsher on a show or more forgiving of a show because of the meta elements of its construction. This will happen. Even if you think it's minor, which in a lot of cases it might be, it will happen. And this is designed to take that mechanical score and balance it against what you think about the meta elements. But the nice thing about this rubric is that, let's say you're somebody, you don't give a shit about the meta elements. You don't follow studios. You don't follow the history of anime. You don't really care if it's an anime original or an adaptation, right? You zero out all of these things, and your final score, which goes up here, is just your mechanical score. This rubric is designed to account for what you think is important. And we'll get down once we're done. I'll explain why this is actually one of the better ways to go about scoring things and talking about your scores when we get done. So that's why these two are balanced the way they are. And the zero value division allows you to completely nullify this if this is not something that you actually care about. I did think about this because I know that there are all types. Okay, so then we can go down and, obviously we already talked that art, animation, music, and writing, those comprise our mechanical values of a show. Under art, we have character design. That's pretty self-explanatory. Colors, also pretty self-explanatory. Backgrounds, this is a big thing for people who have watched a lot of anime who notice good and bad backgrounds, right? This may not be as important to some people, but it's there, right? Again, you just zero it out if it's not something that you notice or care about. And then we have props. Now, props is something that I included because it's not something that you can kind of account for in art design. If you're just looking at those first three, this is going to be more applicable to science fiction and fantasy shows, less sci-fi shows, less slice of life shows, rather. Slice of life shows are probably most often going to just get a 0 in the prop section because it doesn't actually matter. So props is going to be things like your mechas or like a character's sword in a fantasy thing, right? Do the props used in the show, do they have character? Do they have meaning? Are they well designed? That's what props is designed to account for. So then we go down to animation. We have the flow. So how well is it arranged? Excuse me. How well does it flow, right? Is it, janky? Does it look bad? Does it feel like there's, missing keyframes? Or is it something like Redline, where it is the most smooth, beautiful thing ever put to television? That's what this is designed to measure. Consistency is, does the show have a consistent quality to the animation, right? Does it reserve quality animation to just the fight scenes? Bones is kind of, the studio Bones is kind of notorious for this, where their fight scenes look absolutely fantastic, but then when it's, characters talking or more calm scenes, it doesn't look so great. Consistency is designed to measure that. It's, does the quality of the animation maintain itself across the course of the show, or is it kind of spotty in places? And then direction. Direction is going to be our shot composition. How is everything assembled? This is going to be your angle, your shot angles. This is going to be, how our pans and, crops and stuff, how is all of that used is going to be your direction. And part of that also is the lighting. How are shadows used? When there's like a dawn or dusk situation, do they just kind of, is it just like a color palette swap, or is it actually lit in a completely different way to sort of emphasize things, right? That's going to be part of your direction as well. You combine these two, you get your direction score, and then you combine these three, and you get your animation score. So then music, we kind of already touched on it, but we got the mixing. How well does the music combined with, the dialogue or, the sound effects? Is it overbearing? Can you barely hear it? Do they adjust it? This is pretty self-explanatory, I think. Now, variance of music is a show, does it have like the same 3 tracks for one particular thing and then like maybe 2 tracks for everything else? How much actual distinction is there in the OST? And then obviously OP and ED, this is pretty easy to judge. Is it a banger? Is it something that is thematically appropriate? It's self-explanatory. Tone. Tone is really important. Does the music match what is going on? Is it appropriate to what is being implied and the emotions being displayed in the actual scene or the show at large? And then integration and tone are kind of similar. Integration is how well does the music work with what is actually physically happening on screen? Or is it just kind of slapdash thrown in there because a fight scene, rock soundtrack, that'll work. But it's just kind of generic and it doesn't really fit with what's actually happening or something like that. So tone and integration are rather similar, but they are separate enough that I split them up. And so these are our music values. Let me go down some more. And now writing. Writing has the biggest thing because writing, there's a lot here. And personally, since I was the one that that made this, writing is my forte. This is the thing that I notice most. I encourage anyone who is, an artist or a musician or an animator, if there are more things that I'm missing because I'm not as well versed in those things, let me know. Let me know whether or not this could be improved, added upon, so on and so forth, because writing is a little bit more complex, but that's just because I know it a little bit more. So with writing, we have 3 things. We have our narrative, our characters, and our meta-narrative. For the actual narrative itself, we have plot, pretty self-explanatory. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it, extraneous? Does it matter? That sort of thing. We have our tone. Is the tone of it sort of working with what is trying to be, is the show about something that the actual narrative rather actually helps to enforce, and is it cohesive essentially? Pacing, is it fast? Is it slow? Does it slog? Is it rapid fire 1 second and then just like 3 episodes of bullshit the next second? This is pacing. Progression. Progression is, does the show seem to actually evolve as it goes along? Are we actually making progress through the course of the narrative? Is there actually something, a through line that you can follow instead of just, sitting around and nothing happening, is that kind of thing. Now, derivation. You're going to see derivation twice here. Derivation is how derivative is the content. Have I seen this before? Almost wholesale. Derivation can be a problem, or it might not be a problem. This is another one where 0 can allow you to adjust what you think about a show and what you care about. So derivation, for me, is going to be, if it's really derivative, is there enough originality in how it's presented and like the things being done to make it not, dip into the negative score territory? If it's very original and I've never seen anything like it, we're into the high positives with derivation. Now, characters. Purpose. Are there any extraneous characters? Does every character seem to have a value proposition in the show? Or are there a lot of characters that just don't seem to matter and it's just a big cast for the sake of itself? That's what this measures. So growth is, do the characters actually change? Is it interesting to watch them? Do they start one way and go through events and become someone else? This is a huge point, a big one for me. Static characters is what this is measuring. So consistency is, do the characters do things out of the blue just because they are authoritatively mandated because it needed to happen, and so one is chosen at random and it doesn't matter what their development and what their established character actually is? That's what consistency for characters is actually measuring, is, are they consistently used in a way that is consistent with their character? And then obviously derivation. You're going to see this a lot in, like 4 girls shows and, isekais. A lot of the characters are really derivative of each other. There's not much originality there, but again, that's what that's measuring. And now we go down to meta-narrative. So internal consistency. This is not going to be as relevant for slice of life shows. This is more of a big kicker for fantasy and sci-fi shows. Do the rules set forth by the show get followed? Or are they repeatedly broken for the sake of moving the story where the author wanted it to go? Internal consistency. Does the in-universe world make sense? Is it actually a hard and set, thing that is actually valued and utilized by the show? Logical progression. Do the events as they are taking place logically follow? Does it make sense that because X happened, the next thing to happen would be something in the vein of X? Does it make sense? Can you follow it? This is kind of an important thing to take into the account of the whole show, because a lot of shows have, in medias res. Logical progression is a big problem when you start having Deus Ex moments. This is a big thing that you can't really judge on an episode by episode basis, because of things like plot twists and stuff like that. But it's an important thing to know, because if something doesn't make sense, if it didn't, there was no setup, there was no development, there was nothing, this is going to be a negative score. Tension. Are you glued to it? Is it something that you're just like, you're waiting to see what happens? Obviously, that's what tension measures. Now, tension and catharsis are kind of hand in hand. They don't necessarily have to be, but they are kind of hand in hand. Catharsis is that thing that you feel when the hero finally achieves his victory. Does it feel good? When it's all said and done, are you like, yes, that made me satisfied? That's what catharsis is, and catharsis is a huge measure, in my personal view, of whether or not something is actually good. Now we have theming down here. So theming, pretty self-explanatory. Do the themes match the narrative? Do the themes, are they clearly communicated? Are they strong? Are they weak? The theming is pretty self-explanatory. Nuance. Nuance is how much thought did you need to be putting into this in order to really understand what it was going for? Did the characters just tell you how they felt? Are there excessive monologues? Just let it, this is essentially a measure of show, don't tell, of allowing you to infer what's going on and how well the show is actually enabling you to make a correct inference. That's nuance. And then complexity, which should be pretty apparent. How complex is it? How much did you have to be paying attention to understand how the show was working, what was going on? Or was it just some bland, like you could literally look at your phone for 5 minutes and look back up and you would be able to perfectly understand everything that was going on? That's complexity. So now that we have explained what all of these are, I am more than happy to go into looking at how this breaks down and how it works with a show that I've already done. And then we're going to move into a show that I haven't done yet, so I can show you my thought process and kind of the thought process that I want people to have as they actually go through scoring these. So the thing we're going to pull up is do-da-da-da. We're going to look at what I scored do-da-da-da and how this broke down. So you will also have noticed that up here, there was a maladjusted. Once we get to the final score here, I'll explain what that means, because there's a second chart that I've got to help you with what that means. It's very simple. It's not nearly as complex as this. So let's look. Okay. So the way that I do this is I start at the top and I work my way down. And then as we start to get averages, then I work my way back up. Now, obviously, nobody else needs to do this. You can kind of go through this however you want. You can even start in the middle. Like, that the music is something that you're really into and you have a lot to, you paid attention to it, a lot about it, and just do that first, right? This is not something that you have to do in any particular order. What really matters is going through and getting all of the scores done so that you can get your average. Now, the nice thing about this too, I forgot to mention when we were on the previous screen, is that this rubric is designed to take figuring out that holistic score out of your hands, because it is really hard to think back on a show and remember all of it all at the same time and try to develop a holistic score for it in just in a moment. It's difficult to think about all that stuff and to sort of coalesce it, in real time in your head. This takes that out, this removes that from, you don't need to do that. This does it all for you. It's math. It's based on numbers. So you can actually concentrate on the individual scores of all the things, and you don't have to worry about, well, how does that feed into, the overall show? I don't know, but, you don't have to try to balance it. This does all of the balance work for you. So we're going to start over here. I have all of the, over here where my mouse is, I've got all of the individual, everything here. I've got it all blanked out so that we can see. I'm going to slowly reveal all of these and we'll start to get through it. So I put a 0 for the source, not something I care about. Time also a 0. I think for a lot of people, except for those who are, really big anime fans, like the people who have been like watching this shit religiously for years, they're going to have a lot more up here. This is, for most people, I think, going to be a rather sparse thing. It's not necessary for, most people to use this, but it's there. It's important for it to be there for those guys who are a lot more intense about it. I'm going to make a cut here because I got to take a drink. All right, we're back. So, history. I put a 0. I can't think of anything in that Durarara did and that was, particularly of note. Now, studio. 0. It's I forget what the studio is. Anytime I'm doing these, I actually go into Mal and I look at what the studio, who they are and everything so that I can accurately measure this. It was a 0. And nobody on the staff was anybody that I particularly care about. So our Metascore ends up being 0. Which means that Durarara is going to be measured purely on its mechanical value. And I feel like this is probably going to be the majority of people. If you're going to use this rubric, most people are going to end up with the mechanical score being their final score. So I figured this was a good way to start us off. Okay. So character design for Durarara, I gave it a positive 8.7. Looks pretty good. It's actually pretty high. This is a pretty high score. Remember, this is a -10 all the way up to a +10, right? So character design Durarara, I think, is pretty nice. The colors, I am not a big fan of. I don't think the colors are all that great in Durarara. I'm not going to go into the thought process behind these for this particular one. We'll save that for the show that I'm going to score in real time. This is just to show you how things break down and like how it is utilized. All right, so backgrounds, we gave a positive 7.9. And props, we gave a positive 7.6. So once you have all of these, you add all of these together, you divide them by 4, which gives us an art score of a positive 4.1, which on this chart, let me take a minute here. A positive in any capacity is a good thing, right? Because remember, 0 is pure average, right? So any positive for a show is good, even if it's just a +1. That's good. All right, so animation. Our first thing is going to be flow. I gave it a -5.6. I don't think it's all that well animated. I don't think it looks that great. Consistency, also, derpy as fuck. So I gave it a -7.7. A composition, I gave it a positive 3.9. I actually think that it's pretty well shot and put together. And then lighting, I gave it a -9.8 because I have a lot of problems with the way that Durarara is lit. So we add these two together. We divide by 2, which gives us our -3 for direction. And so for those of you who might be doing the math at home, when you're using the decimal points, you're obviously going to need to round for that second decimal place. Or, if you get if I remember correctly, that -3 direction was like a -2.98. So when you round up, it just becomes 3. All right, so that gives us a animation score. We add these 3 together and we divide by 3. Gives us a -5.4 for animation. So then we go into music. I gave mixing a 0. Not something that I was all that paying that much attention to. I gave Variance a 1.7 because I think that there's actually a lot of different songs or a lot of different tracks rather in Da-da-da-da. OPs and EDs, I give a 9.5. There's a ton of them. I like almost all of them. It's a really good selection of OP and ED songs for Da-da-da-da. I gave a tone a negative 8.4. It doesn't seem to match all the time, and it's kind of all over the place in a lot of ways. But integration, I gave a positive 7.5 because I think that over the course of the show, it really it cues you into what is intending to be happening with the music. Like I said, with the next show that we're going to get to, I will explain my thought processes as we assign scores because we're going to be doing it in real time. So then that gives us a music score. Add all of these up and divide by 5. Positive 2.6 for music. It should also be noted that as we go through this, you're gonna see that as you are giving individual scores to all of these things. What I found when I was doing this and I was first testing out this rubric, just excuse me, as I was going through and I was balancing it and trying to make sure that everything worked correctly, that I really, when I got these generated scores from the math, it felt appropriate. It felt right. Obviously, to use this correctly requires a fair bit of honesty on your part. This does not work if you are not being honest about it. It does require some honesty, but if you are being honest and you are scoring everything at, the most honest that you can, I found that when it, generated its, the mathematically generated values, they seemed appropriate. They seemed correct, and I was happy with them all the time. So don't be afraid of just putting down what you think. Remember, this rubric is designed to do that for you. This is really breaking it down into a focus that you can actually pay attention to the individual things, and then this will determine for you how that thing adds up. All right, so the plot. We're going to go down to narrative now, which is part of writing. We're going to go to our plot. I gave the plot a negative 9.2. I'm not a fan at all. Tone, I gave a negative 6.6. Pacing, I gave a negative 10. Progression, I gave a negative 4.9. And derivation, I gave it a positive 5.7. I think it's pretty different, pretty unique, and pretty wacky. But that gives us a narrative score of a negative 5. So then we move on to our characters and the purpose. I gave this a negative 10. It's really, really bad. Like the worst. We have growth. I also gave that a negative 10. The consistency, I gave that a negative 10. And derivation, I gave a negative 5.7. I don't like the characters of I think they're shit. If that wasn't already immediately apparent. But we add all those up and divide by 4. We get a negative 8.9 for characters. And then we move on to meta-narrative. Internal consistency, a negative 4.8. Logical progression, a negative 10. Tension, negative 3.5. Catharsis, negative 5.8. Theming, negative 8.7. Nuance, negative 10. And complexity, negative 4.4. Which gives us a meta-narrative score. We add all these up, divide by 7, of a negative 6.7. So now to determine our writing, we'll add all of these 3 up, divide by 3, and we'll generate a negative 6.9 for writing. And now we're going to get our mechanical score. We're going to add all those 4 up, and we're going to divide by 4. We're getting a negative 1.4 for mechanical, which means that our final score is negative 4.1. Now, this is important. This is where I want to stop and show why this is, why I am so happy with this chart, right? Because, let's say that you have another show that ends up being scored a negative 4.1. But let's say that that's because none of the art and animation was good at all. It was all shit and terrible, right? Under a normal scoring system, you would have both of those shows at a negative 4.1, and you would tell somebody, both of those shows, what did you think of this show? Negative 4.1. Well, what did you think of this show? Negative 4.1. That doesn't tell the other person anything about what you actually thought about it and like why that was the case. The nice thing about this rubric is that you can put this in when somebody asks what your opinions on something are. You can put this in and you can see that, oh, well, I thought that the character design was really good, but the writing was so bad that it lowered down the score. It brought things down. That is what this is really good for, is taking what you actually care about and comparing it against what you really didn't like. So let's say that I was in a Discord chat, for example, and somebody asked what I thought about da-da-da, and I just posted this. Well, they could go through and they could look at this, and they'd be able to see, oh, he really didn't like the characters. The characters were really, really awful. So let's talk about why you didn't like the characters and what you thought was wrong with the characters. This is what this is good for, is being able to focus discussion, focus conversation, and really get into what people think about something without having to justify, what they think or, slowly work into what the problems are. This is what this is for. It is an incredibly focusing tool. It's a focus tool as well as a cataloging tool. So I said that we had a thing up at the top of the original that said maladjusted, right? Because mal obviously does not have a -1 value that you can apply to it. So I want this to be able to be used by people who still want to score things on mal. I want you to be able to take this value and actually use it to influence your mal score and put it where it should be in a mal. So I have this other chart here, the rubric scale. So on the top we have mals 1 through 10, and on the bottom we have my -10 to +10. And this is how this works. Once you get your final score output by the rubric, you go down to the bottom here, you find your value, and for this we were at -1.4. That cleanly puts us within the 5 of mal. So this is our maladjusted score. Our maladjusted score is 5. So you see how this shakes out. That And the reason I included this was not just for the purposes of being able to use this to actually provide scores for mal. It's a comparator, because most people understand scoring in terms of mals 1 through 10, right? If you said, I think da-da-da is a -1.4, people would think that you think it is like the worst shit in the world, that it is absolutely terrible, less than 0, right? This maladjusted score, which I love the name of it, maladjusted, play on words. It's great. I think it's hilarious. This allows you to say, it's a -1.4, but that translates to a 5 on mal, average, right? This keeps things from getting wildly out of control and people shitting down your throat for rating something in the negative category, right? So that's what that is for. That's I'll be providing the links to this. I don't know where. I'll upload it somewhere so everybody can get all of these things and use them. But this is how the chart breaks down, and this is kind of how it is used, and this is what it will look like when you fully fill it out and you finally get everything. So without further ado, let's move on to the show where I'm going to go through it. I'm going to explain my thought process behind the whole thing, and we're going to get into some brass tacks with this one. I don't know how the recording is going to actually, look. I don't know if you're going to be able to see me pulling up the extra windows and the calculator and stuff, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We'll figure it out. Alrighty, let's move on to my favorite show of all time. I figured it was appropriate, Spice and Wolf. I am going to go in and explain how I think Spice and Wolf should be scored. Now, the reason I chose Spice and Wolf, my favorite show, was to start off doing this with the caveat that I don't think that your favorites have to be your highest rated scores. They don't have to be. Because I don't think that Spice and Wolf is as good a show as something like, I don't know, Gurren Lagann or Bakemonogatari. I don't think that it is as good. But that doesn't mean it's not my favorite. This is why I don't like holistic scores, because I don't think that your favorite has to be your highest rated show or some bullshit like that. It's not how that works. So we're going to see where Spice and Wolf ends up falling on the rubric. as it is my favorite show. But I'm going to be completely honest with all of our scores as we go through this. So let's get down to it. So source. Now I'm going to pull up the numbers for all of these. This is going to be using I've been using the same sheet as I've gone through. So you're going to see scores pop up, and then I'm going to change them to what I actually think. So for source, I own all of the light novels for Spice and Wolf, and I'm a huge fan both of the translation itself, and I've heard that the actual books in the original Japanese are also really, really good. So I'm going to give this a positive. Oh, we are on the wrong thing, the wrong layer. All right, so I am going to give the source material because I have read them and I love them, but it is still a light novel, so you can't. There is limitations to the prose. It's not, beautiful literature or anything, but it is good. So I think that you can safely give I'm going to give the source here a positive 5.7. Positive 5.7 for the source material, okay? The time in which it came out, that's going to be a 0. I don't think that it actually mattered very much. It wasn't influential. For me, it wasn't a thing that I was particularly susceptible to it or something when it came out. Or when I watched it, rather. Okay. History. History is also a 0. I don't think that Spice and Wolf, changed anybody's opinions and, drastically altered the industry in any way. The studio is going to be a 0. It's Spice and Wolf is made by Studio Imagine. I'm not particularly attached to any of them. I don't really care. And then staff, again, 0. Nobody worked on it who I'm particularly fond of. I will say that, for me, somebody who, if Akiyuki Shimbo is working on a show, that's going to get an actual score. It's going to be a positive, something like that. So that means that our Metascore, we're going to drop this in. That is going to make the Metascore a positive 5.7 because of the source material. Okay. So now let's get into art. Character design. Character design in Spice and Wolf, for me, is really strong. I like it. This is not the actual score. Like I said, I got to adjust everything. These are old scores from a different show that I was working on. I think it's actually really strong. You've got a very interesting, you got an interesting aesthetic with the character design because it's like Renaissance Italy in a way. You get that slight more than fantasy, not quite full fantasy vibe, but everything is I think is consistently designed. All the characters look really good, and they have this sort of ruggedness to them, this lived in feeling to all of the character designs. And there's a really strong attention to detail with the clothes, and you can almost see how they're stitched and put together in a little bit more of a crude way. I'm going to give the character design here a 7.6 because I think it's really good. It's not bordering on perfect, but it's pretty good. Now, the colors in Spice and Wolf, I think, are absolutely gorgeous. The colors are amazing in the show. There's a lot of golds and reds and just generally a lot of colors that you don't see in anime, as highlight colors. It's very, very beautiful, very eye-catching. I love it a lot. I'm going to give the colors in Spice and Wolf a 9. I think we can give it a low 9. A 9.2 I think is appropriate here. Backgrounds. Oh my god. The backgrounds in Spice and Wolf are absolutely gorgeous. I love them a ton because it's these rolling fields and mountains, and when they get into cities, all of them are different. You can actually tell. There is a sense of these are all built within the same time period, but you get a different feel from each of the cities when you are looking at them as part of the background. They actually have distinction. Which in fantasy shows tends to be kind of a problem, wouldn't you know? So this, I'm gonna say, this earns a high 8, an 8.8. We'll put that in. And props. There's not very many props in this. At most, the thing that you would see most is gonna be Lawrence's cart, or the little bag of wheat that Holo keeps around her neck. Props in this are not that strong. They don't really matter. So we're going to give that a 0. Right, so for art, that means that we're going to add those up. A 7.6, a 9.2, and 8.8. And we're going to divide those by 3, which gives us an 8.5 for art. Go ahead and put that in. Oops. Alrighty then. So now let's move on to animation. Animation flow. Now this is going to be one that I think is difficult because a lot of Spice and Wolf is static. There's not that much animation going on, so there's not much to really judge. But I think that when it is moving and it is, action based, it's not the worst, but it's not the best either. It's actually a very difficult thing to judge. I would actually venture to say that the flow of the animation in Spice and Wolf is trending into the negatives. It's not really that great. So we're going to give it a low negative score. I'm going to say that like a negative 2.4. A 2.4 is appropriate for the animation flow for Spice and Wolf. Consistency, though, is really strong. Consistency is, that's by virtue of they don't have to move. The characters aren't moving a lot, so there's not really a chance for, as long as, the characters aren't moving a lot, so there's not any real issue with keeping them on model, so to speak. So I think that we're going to have to say that this is going to be a positive score, but it's going to be low positive because the threshold for, it actually being consistent is going to be, relatively low. So I'm going to say that we can give this a 4.2 for consistency. And then direction. Let's look at composition. The composition in Spice and Wolf just kind of is. It doesn't really do anything particularly spectacular. It doesn't have, it doesn't, it's a 0. It's a 0. It's just completely average. It works. It's not boring, but, it doesn't do anything for you, really. Lighting is in a similar position. There's not that much emphasis placed on the lighting. It's just kind of whatever. This is also going to be a 0. There's not much to be gained from this. Which is going to give us a direction score of 0. It's not because I don't care. It's just because it truly is average. It functions. It's not offensive. Which then gives us an animation score of 4.2 minus 2.4 divided by 2 gives us a 0.9. A 0.9 for animation. You see how this is like shaking out? How it feels appropriate? For those who have seen Spice and Wolf? Right? This is designed to, make sense. When you get to these final averages, when you're actually, generating these with the math, it does make sense. So now mixing and music. Music in Spice and Wolf is something that I can actually speak to for once. I think it's great. The mixing is fantastic. It goes up and down. It cuts out sometimes. For key moments, it's really, really good. This, I think, is this is like a 7.9. It's bordering on, like, some of the best. Variance. This is actually pretty low. Spice and Wolf kind of relies on a couple key songs to really sell itself. Now, those songs, we're going to get into it, those are good, but it does rely on a couple key songs to sort of make its presence felt. It's not that variable. And when it does go into variability, changing things up, a lot of them are not the best. So this is going to definitely be a negative score. And I think that it's appropriate to say that this is like a negative 5.5 for variance in the music. But the OP and ED for these are really beautiful, very pretty, very laid back, very calm, very quaint, I would say, in their construction, which is fitting with the kind of overall the overall feeling of the show. So this is going to be a really strong one. I think that the OPs and EDs are great. They're not perfect, but they're trying to get there. I think an 8.3 is appropriate here. And then tone. Tone for the music is great. Like I said, it's it has a quaint feeling to it. It has a traveling, innocent traveler's feel. It really captures the ambivalence, almost the carefree ambivalence of both Lawrence and Holo, as they're going through a land that is, has different politics going on that they're not really concerned about. I think that the tone of the music is fantastic, and it doesn't shove it down your throat. One of the biggest judges for tone is going to be, does the music try to force you to feel a certain way? Never really does. I also think that this is going to be in the 8s. This is, I think we can give this a similar score of an 8.2. Okay. So then integration. Because the tone of the music is so good, the integration, it works really well. But again, because of that lack of variance, the integration kind of suffers because it's not always on the mark. For those couple songs where it's really strong and doing a lot, it's really good for the integration. It makes you understand kind of the thought process behind the characters. But there's a lot of songs in here that just kind of don't matter. They don't feel like anything, and they just kind of feel like background noise. So this is actually going to be, it is positive because the highs are bigger than the lows, but it's going to be a low positive. I'm going to say that the integration here is like a 2, we're going to give it a 2.9, or we're going to give it a 2.8, a 2.8 for integration. So we're going to add all these up. We're at 7.9 minus 5.5. Plus 8.3, plus 8.2, plus 2.8. We're going to divide that by 5, which gives us a final score of 4.3 for music. Which is, it's appropriate. Remember, a positive is good, always. Always is good for a positive. Now, the writing, the plot. Now, Spice and Wolf in the show, obviously, did not really conclude the overarching plot, but we're judging it purely based on the show. And it did end up being able to actually end somewhere that I felt was appropriate. It did have a good cutoff point. Now, the plot is interesting because it is an interpersonal plot. The exterior forces largely are not influential on like what you're actually watching the show for. The plot is about Lawrence and Holo and them, coming together to eventually fall in love. And this show, I think, does a pretty good job of not only starting that journey, but also ending it at a point where you can definitely tell that did get achieved by the end of the second season. That was most certainly the feeling that you got, the sort of end note, the definitive, they finally got there. Not to the degree that it ends up happening in the light novel, but they did get there. So, and the plot itself is it's an interesting love story in so much as it's taken through a route that you don't typically see. The way that Lawrence and Holo sort of bounce off of each other and, Lawrence's profession, it kind of makes it into a little bit more of an interesting dynamic. So I think that the plot here, I'm going to give it a 6.9. Nice. Alrighty. So then we're going to move on to tone. The tone of the plot almost doesn't matter. It's just a love story. It doesn't have any strong, there's not any strong tonal vibes. It kind of fluctuates a lot depending on like the situation that Lawrence finds himself in. But largely it is ambivalent. The tone is one of ambivalence. Which kind of works really well for a show that is about two characters and then just, coming to understand each other and fall in love. But again, because the tone is largely about ambivalence, I'm going to give it a 0. It almost doesn't even matter. Pacing. The pacing of this show, it is slow, for sure. But that's kind of the point. Again, this ambivalence of tone kind of allows you to understand that the pacing is not meant to be moving at like a rapid fire pace, and that you're just designed to drink it in. And the way that it is paced encourages that. It makes you understand that is the way that you are meant to process things. So in a lot of shows where pacing being slow would be a detriment, here it's actually a positive, because not only do they achieve it well, but they push you into a mind state of watching the show that you appreciate that slower pace. So thus, I'm going to give it a medium 8. We're going to say that this is going to be like an 8.4 for the pacing. Progression. Now, despite that slow pacing, the progression is there. They are moving forward. There's always a clear goal in sight. And then there's, smaller goals as the arcs progress, that they actually do move from point A to point B really, really well. This is actually going to be a high 8 for me. This is going to be an 8.9. It's bordering on perfect for the progression. Just enough to make you actually interested to watch what the next thing is going to be. And then derivation. Now, it is a love story, so the derivation is kind of large. Holo is obviously a tsundere to a degree. Lawrence is a straight man to a degree. But the derivation is actually offset really strongly here because it's a show about economics, about Renaissance period European economics, which is just bizarre. It is one of the most original things that you could possibly have for just like the framing device. I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10 for derivation just because the characters have a derivative score of their own. The plot itself is wild. It's nothing else has ever come out of, there's nothing similar to Spice and Wolf in terms of its actual narrative. So let's get our final score of a 6.9, nice, plus an 8.4. Plus an 8.9, plus a 10. Now, because we have that 0 in here, we are only going to be dividing this by 4, not 5. Remember that 0 does not count toward the sum total division, which gives us an 8.6 for narrative. Okay. We're almost done. So, characters, purpose. Purpose here is very, very strong, bordering on perfect. Characters are not introduced unless they fucking matter. And in many, many cases, they show back up and continue to matter throughout the course of the show. This is almost perfect. There are some characters that aren't as strong, and their purpose feels less important. So this is not 100% perfect. This is not a 10. But this is a bordering on perfect, so we're going to give this a 9.3. Okay? Growth. Very strong. It's a slow burn romance. Of course, growth is going to be on the forefront of the characters. And the best part about this growth is that it is not forced upon you. We're going to get into this with the meta-narrative elements, but it doesn't try to... The characters never monologue about how they feel. You're just allowed to infer, and then the other characters are also allowed to infer what the other characters are thinking. There's a lot of just natural flow state of how people interact with this. So the growth is also very strong. Not perfect, because there are certain characters that do remain static, and these are mostly the side characters, but it is there. So this, we're going to give a low 9 as well. 9.1, less than the actual purpose. Now, consistency. This is weird. Not as strong. Holo bounces around a whole lot as her whims dictate, and it's not always the best. It's you can kind of justify it here and there, but there are certain times where it just doesn't feel quite right. The consistency is largely okay, but it's not. It's shaky. The consistency for the characterization is kind of shaky in places. Season 2 does a lot better job of this, but season 1 it is kind of shaky. So because of that shakiness, we're gonna give this a 4.8. It is still good for the most part, but it's not really the best. Actually, I'm gonna lower that. I'm gonna lower that. I'm gonna give it a 3.8. We're gonna lower it a whole value. That seems more appropriate. All right, and now derivation. Obviously, this has to be a negative score because, Lawrence is a straight man, Holo is a tsundere, the characters themselves, and I mean, it is a romance, so, their interactions are going to be pretty rote. They're pretty derivative. It's not super strong derivative because obviously Holo, she is a cheeky god, And I mean, that itself is actually kind of derivative. But, Lawrence is a, excuse me, Lawrence is a straight man and an economist. That's also, that helps the score. But it is going to be a negative. We're going to have to say that this is a rather high, a mid-high negative. So this is going to be like a 6.5. Negative 6.5. So for characters, let's add this up. We have a 9.3, a 9.1, a 3.8, minus a 6.5. We'll divide that by 4, which nets us a 3.9, which is appropriate for characters. Put that in. There we go. All right. So now our final score, the final thing we had to put input values for, meta-narrative. Internal consistency. Now, the show does not have a lot of rules, but there's a lot of economic rules, and it follows them to a T. It is almost entirely about explaining how the rules work and then showing how they can be manipulated. It is about wit. This is one of my biggest things. This is part of why I love this show so fucking much, because I love shows that have a lot of rules and a lot of ways that the world operates, and then instead of writing the character out of it by him just overpowering the laws of the world and being an exception to the rule, far more interesting in writing is creating a situation where the character has to outwit the rules, has to work within the system and still come out on top. The internal consistency of Spice and Wolf is a 10 out of 10. It is fucking perfect. I love it. I love everything about it. The logical progression, it makes sense. Obviously Lawrence is a traveling salesman, and so the logical progression of how they go about getting from place to place and the things that happen in those places, these all make sense. There is a little bit of vagueness with the logical progression in terms of like, where is Lawrence going and why is he going one way or another? And they explain it sometimes, but it's not fully perfect. It's just really close. So we're going to give this a 9.6 for logical progression. Okay. Now, tension. Tension is really high in this show and really well executed because of that high internal consistency of allowing wit to dictate how characters work within the situation, because it establishes all the rules up front, and you know that they're never going to just blatantly violate the rules and therefore take away tension. The tension is always maintained at a really, really strong high. So I'm going to say the tension here is a 10 out of 10 for those situations. Catharsis, not therefore, because of the internal consistency and the tension, and is also a 10 out of 10. It's perfectly executed and maintained, and there's a lot of twists and curves that make the catharsis never feel the same way twice. Really, really good. Now, the theming of the show, it's a love story. It's coming to it's about learning to understand somebody who is completely different from you. We've seen this before. It's not that difficult. It's not that complex to it's not something you have to try to really wrap your head around. It's not particularly deep. It's it just is. But it is sweet. It's honest, and it's it presents itself in a way that is endearing. So we're gonna give this a positive, but it's gonna be a low positive because the theming is just kind of whatever here. But like I said, it's endearing, so I like it. I'm partial to love stories in general. I'm gonna give this a 4.4. Okay, and now nuance. There's a lot. Understand, because of that high internal consistency and the fact that it's about economics, there's a lot of nuance here, a lot of wrapping your brain around how everything is going to come together. This is also a 10 out of 10. And then obviously complexity is a 10 out of 10. The meta-narrative of Spice and Wolf is really strong and part of why I like it so much, so it should be no surprise to anybody that meta-narrative is really strong for this one, because I'm big on meta-narrative shit. So let's add all these up. 10 plus a 9.6 plus a 10 plus a 10 plus a 4.4 plus a 10 plus a 10. Alrighty. And then we can divide that by 7, giving us a 9.1 for meta-narrative. Which, again, if you use this chart correctly, everything feels appropriate. It doesn't seem blown out of proportion. Okay. So then we're going to get our writing score. Now we've input all our values. So we're just going to be adding up and getting down to our final score here. So an 8.6, a 3.9, and a 9.1 divided by 3 gives us a 7.2 for writing. Okay. And now we are going to get our mechanical score, which is going to be our art at 8.5, our animation at 0.9, our music at 4.3, and our writing at 7.2. Divided by 4, giving us a 5.2 for mechanical. And this is going to be pretty even because we have a meta of 5.7. So we're going to add both of those up, 5.2 plus 5.7 divided by 2, giving us, oh, I messed up the math there. I misclicked. All right, let's clear that. Let's do that again. 5.2. For those of you who are following along, you probably already figured out what the final is going to be. Divided by 2 gives us a 5.5 final score for Spice and Wolf. Right? And now what we can do is we can go into our maladjusted chart here. Our maladjusted at a positive 5.5, you get an 8 on mal, which is appropriate. Makes sense. So we're going to, oh, we got to find it again. There it is. Get in there. Oh, nope. Close. Ah, I messed up. My mic stand is in the way. I couldn't see. I'll put this up here. And we will go in. This is an 8 out of 10 adjusted for mal. But do you see, now that we've gone through and done one of these completely, do you see where the nuance is? Do you see why this is a more accurate and valuable way to be judging a score, or to judge your things? Because if I said that Spice and Wolf was an 8 out of 10, that doesn't tell you anything. But by going through this chart, and me explaining everything obviously helps to a large degree, but by going through this chart, you can look and see exactly where I thought it was good, where I thought it was just okay, where I thought it was average, or whether I don't, have anything to say about it, what I really liked, what I didn't like so much. And you get so much more out of the score because you can track where it came from. That's the value of this. And I am really excited that I finally was able to get the video done. I was originally going to try to score everything on my Mal list using this system, and, then I would finally release it. I'm not going to do that. There might be some projects coming down the line that utilize this as like a review format. Look forward to that. I haven't really nailed down the specifics of that project just yet, but that's coming down. Feel free. I'm going to try to find a way to provide links to the original files for the original Krita files for the base of these, so that you can use these. Please utilize it. See what it go through, score a couple things, see what it generates. I guarantee you it'll be enjoyable. It forces you to think about the show on a much more minute level. It's a good way to like go back and think about shows that you haven't seen in a while, or shows that you remember really fondly because of the nostalgia, but then you start going down and looking at like the specifics of it and you realize, yeah, that's because of nostalgia. So you give it a higher score in the time category up in meta, right? This is a great it's a great way to reevaluate things, to have better discussion, more focused conversation, and to have a more nuance in how you're scoring things, and to take off of your shoulders that unfortunate difficulty of like, what do I score a thing in total? That's never an easy thing, and this takes care of all of that for you. I really like this chart. I hope everybody else is into this idea. I'm Ash Vampire, and I will catch you on the flip side.